Service. What is up, listeners? Welcome back to another episode of the Full Service Podcast. I am Tank Smith, your host. Today is episode 99. Thanks for being here. Shout out to my guest from last week, Alexis Reynolds. Alexis, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. So much fun. Listeners, if you have not yet, make sure you are following Alexis. She is on Twitter at YourGFAlexisR. She is on Instagram at ModelJordanSin. I have links to both of those in the show notes from last week. Click the links, do the things, give her a follow, show her some love. As always, we're on Instagram and Twitter at FullServicePod. I am at Tank Funkadelic. If you enjoy the show, subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to us on. You'll be alerted as soon as those new episodes drop. Ratings and reviews help so much for visibility for the show, so if you can, hit us with a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, write us a review. I'll love you forever. I'll read it on the air. Today, episode 99, so stoked that you're here. It's just me today, actually. I kind of wanted to, we're almost to episode 100. Amazing. I still like, almost like don't believe that we've almost made it to 100 episodes. So I kind of wanted to just like look back at the podcast so far, what we've kind of done, give y'all some stats. I feel like I never let y'all know what's up with the pod. Yeah, give y'all some stats, let you know where we're going in the future, the plans. Because I'm excited. I'm excited for this show, and I hope you are as well. I feel like the last maybe month or so, a lot of new people listen to podcasts, which is amazing. At least we're getting more followers on Twitter. I don't know if that's like people just following or you're listening to the show, but either way, I appreciate you being here. If you're listening to this right now, welcome. Hey, we're almost to episode 100, which is incredible. I kind of wanted to just look back at where it all started, because when this podcast started, first off, I didn't know if it was gonna work as a podcast, if anybody would want to talk to me, especially sharing things that a lot of people don't talk about. And so first, shout out to all the guests that I've had on the show, because 100% without them, this would not be a thing. Nobody would want to listen to me talk about sex work. I'm not a sex worker, So shout out to every guest that I've had on the show, because this would not be here without you. And shout out to y'all listening to the podcast right now. I started the podcast we dropped in October of 2019, but I actually started recording interviews in July of 2019. So it was a good oh boy, math, 4. What's July 7? 3. What's okay? So 3 months. 3 months of me recording interviews with people before we actually dropped the podcast. I actually put a couple episodes up on SoundCloud, and people could listen to the show there. So I think before we actually dropped in October, I think I had maybe 500 listens on SoundCloud when the show actually was released. And I think I've mentioned it on the show a few times, but how I got people on the show was, I'd put a couple on SoundCloud, and then whenever I'd email somebody requesting, hey, would you want to be on the podcast? Here's a sample of what you would kind of listen to, of what an interview would be like. So that's how it initially started. And shout out the fucking early days, when there wasn't anything to go off of, just the trust that, hey, we might have this conversation, it could be a good thing, and you can put it up, and so the people from the early days, I feel like it's different now, because there's kind of a backlog of what you can kind of listen to and what you kind of can expect coming on the podcast. But the early days, shout out to the people at the very beginning, even the people listening at the very beginning. If you if you're listening to this now and you're like, hey, I remember SoundCloud, hey, fucking sticking around, fuck yeah, hit us with 5 stars. But no, so I was looking at the stats, today, and July was actually the highest downloaded month ever. So we had, I think it was 3,819 downloads in July, which comes out to like 125 a day. And I looked in October of 2019, month one, we had 547 downloads. It doesn't look like we broke 1,000 downloads in a single month until January of 2020, and I didn't have I didn't have a day that had 100 downloads until April 9th of 2020, which is like, 7 months into the podcast, which was that Brian Knight episode. Brian Knight broke that 100 barrier. Shout out to him. Hell yeah. And just some more stats, right? So the top states, I use Libsyn to host the podcast. And so it gives you a map of who's listening to the podcast. And top states listening to the show: Georgia, North Carolina, California, Illinois, Ohio, New York, and Florida. And it's crazy to me. It looks like a world map too. 46 countries are currently listening to the podcast, which is amazing. I still like when I started, I'm like, A, will people talk to me? Like I said before. B, will people listen to this? And the fact that, not even people in the US are listening, but like literally all around the world is amazing. Yo, shout out to y'all. This is I feel like today's episode is just be me. It's going to be kind of short, but it's me just like, shout out to you, shout out to you, shout out to y'all. Because, without y'all listening to the show, it would not happen. But hey, the guests are also more important than y'all. I'm going to say that right now. I was also thinking today, just like the different places I've recorded, I've recorded literally in my room. I've recorded in hotel rooms. I've recorded in friends' apartments. I've recorded in people's homes. I've recorded in condos. I've recorded in my car. I've recorded outside on a balcony. It's just like the the places that we've been with this podcast is truly incredible. I've recorded in Georgia. I've recorded in North Carolina. Spoke to people overseas. It's funny, listening through, I was listening to a few old episodes, and it's interesting just to hear, how much just, it's changed. The questions that I ask have changed, but then also I feel just me as an interviewer has, changed. And it's funny listening back to old episodes, because it is like a time capsule, because we've been doing this podcast the whole, pandemic. We have not missed a week. So it's you can hear just just the pandemic, what the fuck's going on? What's happening? And it's crazy just to hear, you're able to that's the one thing I like about, podcasts. And this podcast is you capture a moment in time, and it kind of lives forever. And, it's always there, which is a cool thing. It's dope. So, like I mentioned, today's episode 99. We haven't missed a single week since starting the podcast, which is crazy to me. I still can't believe it. There's been times when I'm like, hey, there's not a guest coming up. I don't know what's about to happen, but somehow an episode happens. And, throughout, this whole fucking pandemic, there's been an episode every single week. And I kind of mentioned this on Patreon in the last episode. But what I'm going to do, so episode 100 is, August 10th, coming up next Tuesday. And I'm going to take the rest of August off because I haven't taken a break since starting the podcast. And I feel like I just got to do that for my own, mental, I got to chill for a second. So we'll be back in, September, right after Labor Day. I'm going to Bonnaroo that weekend, right before Labor Day. So hopefully, I'm alive to do the podcast. Nah, we will. I'll be fine. But I still got to figure out how to plug in my sleep apnea machine. That's the one thing I'm God damn it, I got to get a generator or some shit, because we about to be camping. And I gotta plug that shit in, because I gotta breathe when I sleep. It's so stupid. So I'll be taking the rest of August off, coming back the first week of September. And when I do, it's going to be bi-weekly, baby. We every other week we're going to be doing the podcast, I think. There's a few reasons for that. I think with doing this podcast every single week, I don't have time to think about how to make the podcast any better, because like I'm constantly just like, hey, I need a guest, I need a guest. Doing like basically 5 episodes a month if you count Patreon, and I'm like, I don't have time to think like, yeah, how to evolve the podcast at all, like how to like make it better for y'all, or make it better for the guests, or just like make it an overall better show, which is what I want to do. I want to constantly improve whatever, I'm doing. And, stand up's back. And one of the things about stand up comedy is that you have to do it a lot, pretty much almost every single day. And I probably spend, like I was talking to my buddy the other day, and in terms of like hours that are spent on this podcast a month is probably for like literally like 40 hours, or spent. You might be like, hear that and you're like, what the fuck are you doing now? Yeah, it's like literally like 40 hours a month that, I spend producing this podcast. It's literally just me. It's just me doing this thing. And, there are things that I want to do just like within stand up. I want to do video stuff. I've kind of mentioned it on here before, but it's like I want to do, video like sex worker videos with me doing stuff with people on YouTube. I'm trying to do funny shit also. So I can't do that and continue to, put out an episode every single week. So what I'm going to do bi-weekly starting the beginning of September. If you, Patreon's still happening though. So you'll get at least 2 episodes a month here. And then if you want to hear like an extra episode, Patreon is always happening, baby. Patreon.com/full-service-pod will always be there. But yeah, I feel like that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today. Short and sweet. That's all it is, We're almost to episode 100. So I'm going up to North Carolina tomorrow. I guess I'm going up on Thursday. Yeah, I'm going up on Thursday. I'll be there through the weekend. So hopefully I'll have an interview for episode 100. I've talked to a couple people, so we'll see what happens. If not, I feel like I'm just going to play like some of my favorite parts of the podcast next week. But y'all hear. I'll tweet about it. But yeah, I feel like I'm not sure if I wanted to say more, but right now I'm thinking like, hey, I feel like I covered it all. I'm thankful for y'all for listening to the show. I'm thankful for every guest that has been on the podcast, which is thank you. This would not be a thing 100% if people were not willing to talk to me, And I think a lot of people ask me, like every time they're like, yo, so why did you start the podcast? And I tell them, I'm like, when I started this, it's like I would talk to people about, being a client and what that was and their perception of it, of clients, of sex workers, was basically 180 degrees from my experience. And so I'm like, yo, let's talk about this thing. Let's take away this veil so it's not the stigmatized thing, because it's literally 2 people doing a thing. Someone's making someone feel good. What? There's nothing wrong with it, And when I think back about the reason why I started the podcast and, why I'm doing the podcast now, it like has not changed at all. Like I still 100%, I'm behind that and have that, in the forefront of my mind when I'm doing this podcast. And I don't think that it's going to stop as long as people are willing to talk to me on a microphone. Then this will always be a thing. So don't you worry at all, people. This podcast ain't going anywhere. I feel like that's kind of what I wanted to say today. It's y'all might be like, God damn it, Tank, I wanted an interview. Hey, yo, we got lots of other interviews you can listen to. And if you've listened to every episode, hey, we got more on Patreon. But no, hey, we'll be back on Tuesday, August 10th, episode 100. Who's fucking excited? I'm excited. We'll see what happens, but hopefully it's an interview. I'm praying, fingers crossed, but you never know what'll happen. There's So many times when this podcast has been close to not being a podcast anymore. I've been saved a few times. And I always think, I'm like, hey, what's gonna happen is gonna happen. As long as I hit that upload button, that's all that matters. I appreciate you being here. We'll be back on Tuesday. Make sure you're following us. Also, I've had people hit me up. If you want to be a guest on the podcast, literally email me, fullservicepod@gmail.com. DM me on Twitter, on Instagram at fullservicepod. You can hit me up at tankfunkadelic. But hey, that's if you want to be on the show, do the things. And if you enjoy the show, hit us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. Write us a review. I will read it and I will love you. And we have stickers for sale. If you want a sticker, DM me and I will send you a sticker. Hey, let's do the things. But I will talk to you later. I will see y'all next Tuesday. Have a good week. Later. Full service.